Scotland is objectively beautiful. The land is breathtaking. The architecture is known worldwide. The people are vibrant. The weather is moody but inspiring. Its songs are sung around the world. Scotland's literature is the stuff of legends. Although many visit Edinburgh on holidays to the UK and Scotland, there are a myriad of locations that are oft overlooked by visitors and locals alike. Today on Meandering Mena, we're going to take a look at some of the best literary locations around Scotland's capital and go on the hunt for bookshops, pubs, museums, monuments, and art that can help us understand the impact that Scottish writers have on Edinburgh and the world. We're beginning our journey in Edinburgh today by train, but even if I didn't need to take the train into Edinburgh, I would still think it important to begin our literary adventures at Waverley train station in the heart of Edinburgh. Waverley is situated in between Edinburgh's medieval Old Town and the New Town, which has a largely Georgian and neoclassical style. Waverley acts as the bridge between the winding roads and inviting closes of the Old Town with the open Hippodamian town plan of the New Town. For those of you who don't know, Hippodamian town planning is a grid-style town plan that most modern cities use today. This style originated in ancient Greece, and it was designed by a man named Hippodamus, hence the name Hippodamian town planning. Edinburgh was the first UNESCO city of literature, which means there's plenty to see relating to the written word. So why are we beginning with a train station when we're talking about Scottish literature? Well, Waverley is the name of one of Sir Walter Scott's novels. Scott was born here and also attended the University of Edinburgh. Originally published anonymously, Scott later acknowledged his authorship of Waverley and about 24 other historical novels, and those are now collectively referred to as the Waverley novels. Waverley tells a story of a soldier navigating through Jacobite uprisings, love triangles, clan leaders, run-ins with the Bonnie Prince Charlie, castles, mysteries, and deceit, and his own destiny. Definitely worth a read if you haven't already. Waverley Station is one of the few train stations in the world named after a piece of literature. Speaking of Sir Walter Scott, just down from Waverley Station is his monument. The Scott Monument is one of the most recognizable silhouettes in the Edinburgh skyline, and its imposing and towering presence is the world's second largest monument to a writer. The Gothic monument has more than 60 sculptures of historical figures and characters from Scott's novels, and it's truly a striking monument that architecturally contrasts with some of the others we'll be looking at in Edinburgh today. It's right next to the Princes Street Gardens, which are beautiful and have a lovely view of the castle, and they're a great place to have a picnic or spend some time reading one of Sir Walter Scott's many, many historical novels. While we're in Princes Street Gardens, let's mosey on down to Ross Fountain, which has some of the garden's best views of the castle. This is another iconic Edinburgh landmark, and nowadays it seems to be an Instagrammable place fit for a selfie, so you'll see plenty of people having mini photo shoots by Ross Fountain. We're here at the fountain because it's stunning, but also because there are 4 muses at the top that represent science, art, poetry, and industry. Our muses today are those of art and poetry, so a visit to this fountain rife with mermaids and cherubs at the foot of a castle surrounded by blossoming flowers is just the inspiration we needed to keep going on our literary adventure. Be sure to walk around the entirety of the fountain, as different vantage points will give you views of the different muses, mermaids, and other creatures of the fountain. Our next stop is right next to the Ross Fountain. Just take this path. I don't recommend straying from walkways when in parks, as you can unintentionally cause damage to the local flora and fauna. To avoid this, please follow the path to our next stop instead of walking the faster route over the grass from the fountain. Remember, the best meanderers leave no trace. This path leads to a solitary stone marker inscribed RLS, a man of letters, 1850 to 1894. RLS is another literary Edinburgher, none other than Robert Louis Stevenson. He's most known for being the author of Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, although he was also a playwright and a poet who wrote A Child's Garden of Verses. This is a really unassuming, and some could argue, anticlimactic memorial to Stevenson, but I think it peacefully and respectfully consolidates the author's life into 4 words. What would your 4 words be? As we continue our walk through the gardens, you'll come across the Call 1914, or the Scottish American Memorial, which was given by Scottish Americans to honor Scots that served in World War I. Apart from having a beautiful frieze and a glorious kilted statue, the memorial bears the words of a war poet, E.A. Mackintosh, from his poem entitled A Creed. Sadly, Mackintosh was killed in battle, but his war poetry is excerpted on this monument. If it be life that waits, I shall live forever unconquered. If death, I shall die at last, strong in my pride and free. Considering the current state of affairs in Europe with Putin's heinous invasion of the Ukraine, E.A. Mackintosh's words ring true over 100 years later, as we see valiant Ukrainians defending their land so as to be unconquered, proud, and free. I could spend hours in the Princes Street Gardens. To be honest, I have. And I'm sure I will spend plenty more hours there before my time on Earth is up. But for your sake, dear viewer, let's take a walk to Old Town for some other literary destinations. Our first stop in the Old Town is the Writers' Museum. You can find this museum tucked away from the Royal Mile through Lady Stairs Close. There's a plaque right above the entrance that tells you that Robert Burns lived just next door when he first moved to Edinburgh. The Writers' Museum has free admission, although donations are welcome, and it's a great place to brush up on your knowledge of the 3 most prolific Scottish literary figures, Robert Burns, Sir Walter Scott, and Robert Louis Stevenson. Videography is not permitted inside, but photography is. I've included some stills, but really the pictures don't do the collection justice. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the treasures you can find here, but be sure to stop by and do some exploring for yourself. You'll find first editions, handwritten manuscripts, a cast of one of the author's skulls, personal effects, newspaper clippings, diplomas, certifications, and even land surveying equipment used in one of the author's day jobs. It's amazing to see in person the actual handwriting of these massive literary figures. It's now time for a pop quiz, Meanderers. So, what are 2 ways to see beautiful, oft-overlooked art? If you said look up and look down, you got that question correct. A prime example of that is in Macker's Court, which is just outside the entrance to the Writers' Museum. Most people don't notice, but the court is rife with quotes by Scottish writers, some of whom you know, some of whom you might not. Be sure to take a couple of minutes and look at all the creative and inspiring quotes on the ground before we move on to our next spot. We're taking a quick detour at the David Hume statue on the Royal Mile. Hume definitely had his flaws and is certainly a controversial figure, but he's a statue we're including on our literary adventure today so we can rub his big toe. Yep, you heard me correctly. It's interesting that Hume's statue is associated with the good luck ritual, considering that Hume rejected superstition and religion. Feel free to rub his toe out of respect, or rebellion, or disregard Hume altogether. Just down from Hume is St. Giles or St. Gilles Cathedral. Its pronunciation depends on who you ask. Although the architecture is worth a stop in its own right, we are here to look at the Great West Window, also known as the Robert Burns stained glass window. When I tell you that neither pictures nor videography could do this stained glass justice, just know that's a huge understatement. You have to come here yourself to take a look. There are also plenty of other memorials to literary figures in the cathedral, so a little bit of time to try and find them all. Potterheads, I haven't forgotten about you. Most fans note that J.K. Rowling was inspired by Edinburgh, which can be seen in several elements in her Harry Potter series. But our next stop is lesser known. J.K. Rowling's handprints can be seen in the City Chamber's courtyard off of the Royal Mile, along with the other recipients of the Edinburgh Award. Next to Rowling's handprints, you'll also find those of Ian Rankin, a well-known crime novelist. Next up is the house of John Knox, which is also conveniently the home to the Scottish Storytelling Centre. This is the place to peruse Scottish-themed books for people of all ages. This is a book lover's paradise, and a Scottish-themed paradise to boot. Do yourself a favor and pop inside John Knox's house while you're here. There is a small fee for admission, but there are several books on display upstairs that date back to the 1500s. John Knox was involved in the Scottish Reformation, and you can learn about his life, clashes with Mary, Queen of Scots, and impact on Christianity through displays in his home. Carpenters and those who appreciate porcelain and tile work will thoroughly enjoy walking through John Knox's house. Again, remember to look up and look down so you don't miss any of the impeccable craftsmanship. A little Easter egg is this fake door lock. Although it looks as if the key were to fit in the exposed lock, the working mechanism is actually hidden under a swinging metal plate. As you leave John Knox's house, you'll come across the Netherbow Port, which is the halfway marker for the Royal Mile. As you walk down the Royal Mile towards Holyrood, you'll see the Kirk of Canongate on your left-hand side. Outside the churchyard, you'll find a statue of Robert Fergusson, who was an inspiration for the great Scottish bard Robert Burns. Fergusson wrote in Scottish Gaelic and Scots English. As an English speaker, I can tell you his poems in Scots English are a little more palatable than those in Gaelic, but I'd still recommend you give his oeuvre a look over. Here's a teaser for you from the poem The Daft Days. Let mirth abound, let social cheer invest the dawning of the year. Let blithesome innocence appear to crown our joy, nor envy with sarcastic sneer our bliss destroy. Robert Fergusson is buried in the Canongate Kirkyard, so you can wander in to find his resting place if you so choose. A little ways down from our friend Robert Fergusson is the Scottish Poetry Library. You'll find this tucked away down a close near the Museum of Edinburgh. It has a lovely collection and is a hidden gem. It's a must-see for any purveyor or patron of poetry. We're continuing down the Royal Mile towards Holyrood, and as we do so, be sure to look south towards the hills where Arthur's Seat lies. Our very own Robert Louis Stevenson thought of Arthur's Seat as a hill for magnitude, a mountain in virtue of its bold design. On your left, you'll soon come across a building of infamous renown. This is the Scottish Parliament building. Most consider it an eyesore, and to be frank, yeah, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and on a gloomy day like today, the gray of the building matches the gray of the sky. It leaves the impression upon the viewer that politics often does: disinterest, despair, and befuddlement. But I'm always hesitant to write off the entirety of an architectural piece, or any creative work for that matter. So let me tell you my favorite aspect of this building that is fairly redemptive. I've walked by this building on several occasions, and I have never, and I do mean never, seen anyone stop to look at the different colored tiles on the side of this building. Are they strikingly beautiful and eye-catching? No. But upon closer observation, these tiles are actually engraved with the words of Scottish writers, thinkers, and politicians, along with text from the Bible and some governing documents that creatively show the purpose and motivation of the building and the activities that take place within. A quote from Andrew Carnegie reads, "Put all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket." Another tile declares, "Work as if you live in the early days of a better nation," which is a quote from Alistair Gray. It's so interesting to see the words like this in the physical building for a group of people that have been tasked with building the present and future environment for its citizens. A person can only hope to elect candidates that understand the beauty and uniqueness of their nation and believe in its vibrant, just, and prosperous future. So for this reason, we'll let this building off the hook. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Palace of Holyrood House, which is most commonly referred to as Holyrood. Its residents and history are full of drama and intrigue, but for our literary purposes today, it has some interesting ties to our friend Sir Walter Scott. Holyrood and its famous residents are referenced in many of his works, such as The Lord of the Isles, The Abbot, and Waverley. Scott's enchanting and romanticized tales of Scotland had a sizable impact on British royalty, including Queen Victoria, and it's definitely worth the entry fee to look around the castle grounds and see the collections. Now, I hope you've worn some comfortable shoes, because we're going up towards Calton Hill to the Robert Burns Monument. The Burns Monument is missing a crucial piece, its statue of Robert Burns. But don't worry, you can still see it as it's housed in the Scottish Portrait Gallery here in Edinburgh. But even without the statue, the monument is still impressive and it has some great views of Arthur's Seat and Edinburgh as a whole. It's also next to the New Calton Cemetery, which has a watchtower that was used to spot the cemetery's body snatchers. The gorse, which are the bright yellow flowering bushes, are blooming, and the way they cover the hills to the south are just stunning. I walked 15 miles today in my adventures. Obviously, you are more than welcome to take buses or other transport to different locations, and there are definitely ways to do that which wouldn't break your bank. But I always like walking to make sure I stumble upon all of the unknown and neglected spots in the city that I'm exploring. I can tell you firsthand that the best coffee shops, bookstores, and restaurants are those that you found because you went, I guess I'll go inside. I walked up Calton Hill to take a look at some of the monuments up there, but really the best part of getting to the top is the view. You can see the old town, the new town, and even out to Leith from here. There's plenty to see, but we're going to continue in our pursuit of literature by walking through the new town to a shop that is aesthetically pleasing, full of treasures, and the perfect spot to pick up a souvenir for ourselves, and everyone else for that matter. Welcome to Topping & Company Booksellers. I am a bookworm, tried and true, but when I tell you that this bookshop is a paradise for bibliophiles, I do not exaggerate. My endorsement is not sponsored, but I wish with all of my heart for the opposite. I don't usually like to film in bookstores, libraries, or museums because I feel it cheapens the experience for me. I end up looking through the lens of my camera more than my own eyes, which results in me not cherishing the experience as greatly as I could or should. For that reason, dear viewer, you will have to journey to a Topping & Company bookshop at some point in your travels to have a look inside for yourself. I will tell you that I had intended on purchasing one book, and I came out with a lot more than that, so be careful if you're anything like me and allot yourself a generous amount of time to explore. What was that one book, you ask? Well, I'd love to tell you, and I'll do so at our last stop. Welcome to the Conan Doyle. Named after Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, this pub is our final stop on our literary journey through Edinburgh. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was, of course, most famously, the mind behind Sherlock Holmes. He was born in Edinburgh and attended the University of Edinburgh, so no, London does not entirely get to claim the great Sherlock Holmes. There was a statue of Sherlock near this spot to commemorate Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's birthplace, but it has been put into storage due to the construction of tram lines in the area. Nonetheless, after walking 15 miles, it's time to break out my deerstalker cap and magnifying glass, accompanied by an iron brew and a tasting of Scottish whiskies to read our recent Topping & Company Booksellers purchase, The Complete Sherlock Holmes. Thank you for joining me on our literary tour of Edinburgh. There are so many other literature-related spots in Edinburgh to see, so leave a comment down below of some of your favorites that I didn't include. Thank you for meandering the gorgeous globe with me, Mena. And remember, the game's afoot.